Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Xanadu Gallery online critique group session. Today is Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. Here we are, another month has shot by, but it's great to be back here with you. I do have, related to the month of November, a couple of quick announcements before we get started. The first is that all y'all are going to be going off daylight saving time this weekend. We do not observe daylight saving time in Arizona. We don't need to save any daylight. We have plenty of it as it is. And therefore, our times become misaligned twice a year. Now, what that means is because of my schedule, I have to kind of stay on the same timing. I'm a little bit of an autocrat, I guess, when it comes to timing on these sessions. So it's going to stay at 9 a.m. Arizona time for me. But for all the rest of you who switch back to standard time on Sunday, that means that next week this session is going to be an hour earlier for you. And so it's going to be important to pay attention to the announcement emails as they come out for these sessions. I include a chart that shows the breakdown of start times in different areas. Now, it gets a little wonky with those of you who might be in, I believe, Europe. It changes at a different time than we do. And so sometimes my schedule doesn't quite match up with that. But hang in there with me. We'll get aligned here over the next couple of weeks and be back on track. But just be aware there is that time change coming. I'll try and announce it abundantly in the announcements for these sessions. Now, there are also a couple of other things happening in November for me that are going to change our schedule a little bit. Number one is that I am going to be going on a 4-night, 5-day trek into the Grand Canyon with a friend of mine, not this coming week, but the following week. So I will not be available for this session then. That means that that typically would be our Ask Me Anything session. I'm going to move that up to next week. We're going to do that session next Wednesday. So keep an eye out for an announcement on that. And then the following week, in the States at least, is Thanksgiving. And so we will not have a session then. So our schedule this month is going to be a little bit wild. We'll get back to it. December should end up being kind of more normal, but just hang in there with me, watch your email. And of course, we'll have recordings of the sessions available on the blog and in the archive so you can catch anything that you might miss. But with that, I would like to welcome our featured artist who is joining us from Illinois, Mary Skydema. And Mary, if you can go ahead and unmute, I'd like to welcome you into the session. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to talk about Mary's work because it's different than, at least that I recall, any of the other artwork that we've featured over the last 18 months that we have been doing these sessions. And so let's start, Mary, by getting a little bit of an introduction to who you are, your background, how you came to be creating the artwork that you are creating, and then we'll jump in and take a look at the artwork. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My path in the arts has been pretty traditional. I was one of those kids who knew that was just what I wanted to do. I never had, I don't have an interesting story about I was doing something in biology or so,
It was just always there.
I just had a very straight trajectory. I got my undergrad in 85 and my master's of fine arts in 90 from Miami of Ohio. I left graduate school, started working in a studio in clay. At that time, my conundrum was, I had been doing sculpture and installations in grad school, and now I had to make money.
So, yes, it's quite a shock, right?
Yeah, it was quite a shock. And I did, for the first time in my life, had to consider what would sell, what I could support my family with. So I switched back to doing functional work at that time. Had a couple children. So I was juggling, raising kids and trying to be an artist for quite a few years. I have had a stint as an education developer for a major art supply company. I did that for 10 years. So I've always kind of struggled with being in the studio full time. I've always had, I've taught. Right now I'm teaching with Ashland University. I'm teaching some art history to incarcerated students across the United States. So I'm getting close to that, that's exciting sort of, I'll put it in quotes, retirement.
Right.
And I'm looking forward to really hitting the studio full time in the next couple of years. So I've been kind of looking for guidance as far as, where to market, how to market. I have always had sales out of my personal studio. My work is in local galleries, but I haven't done a whole lot of branching out.
Yeah, and so we're going to want to jump in and talk quite a bit about that. But let's begin by looking at your art, and maybe you can talk to us. Well, let's start and talk a little bit about medium and technique and what you're doing that is maybe somewhat unique, and your process to creating the work.
Well, I have always struggled between function and more sculptural work. So my bread and butter work is very functional, traditional pottery, but I love to work in, I call these kind of more of my art pieces. I've always been a combiner of materials. I used to blow glass into ceramics vessels with openings cut in them so that the glass would combine with the ceramics. My latest series of work has incorporated more wooden additions. This is actually grapevine, old grapevine. A very good friend of mine who actually is in Arizona right now had found some of these and knew that I would probably love to use some in my work. The automotive material steel stick has changed things a lot for me because it's made additions so much easier. And it's that is also a piece of grapevine root, I believe. So, in this piece, for instance, the dichotomy of what is functional, what is sculptural is kind of seen here. It's kind of oil can form with something, with a very organic addition to it. So I've always liked playing with that dichotomy. That is the vine that I took out of a state forest as that handle on the piece. There's also a stone in the middle of that finial. I like to work with a lot of layers, chunky slips. I've always been a gatherer, so part of my process is going out and looking for things that I would like to incorporate into the ceramic pieces. There's a landscape bowl. That particular piece of wood was chewed on by beavers. And I really, really liked that texture and I wanted to incorporate that.
And what about the glazes? How are you kind of thinking about, what effect you want to achieve and what's the compositional process?
Sure. Well, I do mix my own glazes. I use a lot of underglaze colors, so lots of slips, combinations of ash glaze. I don't normally like a very shiny surface. I'm a pretty rustic kind of girl. So I just have always been drawn to a more tactile, soft. This one has a little bit more gloss than is normal for me, unless it's a functional piece. But I do like to just, layer a lot. I like it to be kind of atmospheric. And this piece, I would say, is probably the most functional of the ones we've seen so far. That would actually work as a serving bowl. This is another piece that sort of has a nod to the landscape. During my process, I go two ways. I either make a ceramic piece and search for a piece that I think will marry with it well, or sometimes I start with a piece of wood or a root, or a piece of vine or something, and work from that. So that's kind of exciting to me. I like to kind of figure out how those pieces will work together, how they'll
And
be.
are you, are these, well, let me put it this way. Are the forms and designs are they happening organically, or do you set out and do some sketches to kind of figure out what the shapes are going to be? What's the process for kind of figuring out what the final form will look like?
A little of both. I mean, I do sketch my work, but sometimes I just sit down at the wheel and work on forms, do some form work, see what I like. Um, you know, so the answer to that is, I guess I do both. I do both
Yeah.
things. Often if I have a piece, like for this particular piece, if I started with that bent root, sometimes I even lay that down on a piece of newsprint and sort of work with that, and then draw around it and sort of figure out what kind of form might work well with it.
And what is the kind of your range of scale of work? What are the smallest works that you might do, and what are the outer limits of the largest work that you can create?
Well, I mean, it's large. I do small, tiny little porcelain, perfume bottles up to, a couple feet tall. I don't get much bigger than that. I do have slight limitations in my kiln, so I've also got
Sure.
to keep that in mind. Yeah.
And then I think we've got just a couple of images that are showing the works grouped together and displayed. And where is this display? Is this in your studio?
This is just this is my gallery at home. I have my studios attached to the house, and then I have just a smallish display space there. A lot of my work goes out. So, but I do have a lot of local people who like to come and see what I've got. I do a lot of birdhouses. That's what you see there on the top.
Yes. So this gives us a little bit better idea of some of the range of work that you're doing, and we're going to want to talk a little bit more about how you're finding your buyers and your market. But before we do that, let me pull some of our audience in and just get some general reactions about the work, what you're seeing in terms of the consistency of the work and the quality of the work, and just your response, how the work hits you. Who would like to jump in? And if you want to just throw a hand up or click on the hand icon, let me start with Kate. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning. I really love your combinations of the wood with the ceramics. It's a lot of fun. I went to art school, so we were like combining stuff with metal and form versus function. Do you make a sterling silver fondue pot with cheese dribbling over it or not? But I really like your work. The one thing I would say is when you photograph it, take the tags off of it.
Yes. And normally I do. I have a student who helps me with some images, and yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up, Kate. And I hadn't noticed the tags in particular, but I was going to comment. I think that these photos work in terms of showing us the form and giving us some of the detail in the work. I do think that your work could benefit from having a little bit more of a setup for the photography, light box and maybe a gradient in the back, so that my focus can be just on the textures of the artwork itself and not, get pulled away and distracted. In this particular piece, I'm seeing the textures in the background and the color on the underneath the piece. So I might suggest it would be worth investing in a little bit of a setup. Unfortunately, it's not a huge investment anymore to get a good setup going. You can hop on Amazon and get some lights and backdrops and that kind of thing, and fairly inexpensively have a great setup to get some more, what I would consider, more professional photos.
Yes, and I do have to admit, I normally do a better job. This was a new student helper, and I sort of let her go on it. And when Lori had sent me the link to apply for this, I shot those out. So this isn't
okay, good.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and I have to be a little bit careful about this because there are times when we have a client who's interested in a piece, and likewise, we just snap a quick photo with,
Yeah.
you know, a camera phone with a piece on the wall or sitting on a pedestal, and we're not really thinking about the finer points of professional photography and that kind of thing. And they can work, you know, they can get the job done. But as you're thinking about sharing work on social media or putting together a portfolio or a website, at that point, it definitely does make sense to kind of be more deliberate in the setup and the photography. So great conversation, great point. Who else wants to hop in with some commentary on the work? Lori Reed, let me pull you in. Also from the Midwest, not too far from Mary, I think.
Oh, we're in France.
Oh, there we go.
Mary and I are in an art workshop together with 4 other women. But Mary, could you talk a little bit about the steel stick and how that's allowing you to combine these forms?
And out of sheer ignorance, you might even have to explain to me what a steel stick is.
Yes, well, it has been kind of a game changer for me because previously, all of my editions, I would do caning. I did my own, you know, soaking the cane and really had to work on getting those tight connections. But so steel stick is an automotive putty, and it's a 2-part putty. You know, I get them at like AutoZone and stuff, and they come in a tube, and it's, you know, you mix it together, and it's great because it's like working with clay. So it can be textured, it can be drilled. So you can kind of see the dark gray section there where the handle attaches to the teapot. That is a little bit of steel stick. It's, you know, hard as a rock once it's dry. It's very malleable for about 5 minutes, but it's kind of been a game changer in the ceramic world. I've noticed more and more people starting to use it because it is so durable. And it's just a great creative tool for attaching these interesting, you know, appendages.
And so I'm assuming that would occur after the firing, obviously, and then
Yes,
yeah.
And you've got to take shrinkage into consideration. You know, so I work with the wooden piece as much as I can after, you know, to kind of refine it and make it fit. But I also do have to consider that in the wet stage with the clay.
And do you, has your clientele, have they responded to the fact that you're using automotive materials? Are they even aware that that's happening? You know, is there any pushback on it, or is it just a new technical innovation that you're happily using and everybody's happy to have the ability to do?
Yes, it is. I have really, the only people who question me about it are ceramic artists, you know, like, how did you?
Purists, right?
Yeah. Yes. But, you know, customers love the new work. I kind of was surprised. I had an open house, I guess the one I had last fall. And I wasn't, you know, it's always, I never know, because most of the people who are used to seeing my work see very traditional functional stuff. And this was a new kind of branching out in the last couple of years, but it's been very well received. So
excellent.
Get to
awesome. Okay. Any other? Yeah. Rebecca, I think I got to you. Rebecca Keller. Let me ask you to unmute there. Click.
Okay.
There we go. Good morning. Gotcha.
Hi. I just have a question. I'm primarily a painter, but I have done some ceramics, you know, when I was in graduate school and stuff like that. And one of the things that fascinates me, again, I really appreciate the combination of the natural organic forms with the clay, which is organic too, in essence. But I was wondering, you know, sometimes I feel like the handles or the connections are sort of separated in some ways. And I was wondering, is there some way that you can attach or recreate those forms on the actual clay piece itself, you know, like wrapping something around or something, or pulling it together? Like, I would find that really interesting, if, as opposed to just having handles or something. Is there a way that you can also incorporate those pieces into the body of the ceramic piece?
The steel stick pieces? I
don't, I guess what I'm saying is, you have these organic forms attached to the ceramic, Is there a way that those organic forms can be kind of reproduced in the body of the piece, maybe using that steel stick stuff or something, like reproducing it or connecting other pieces in ways that wrap around it or something like that?
So more of an integration is what you're.
Yeah.
I have done that in some other pieces where I've
Yeah.
got a little bit of wrapping.
Yeah.
It's not something I've worked with a lot yet because
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is tricky as far as the shrink.
Yeah.
I've got a piece and then the clay shrinks and I've got to kind of overcompensate and make sure
Yeah,
there's really a good fit there. But I do understand your thinking.
Well, I'm just fascinated by the process, and it's so cool, and I'm just wondering, how complicated you can get, how integrated you can get in the process. So.
Sure.
There's never a limit to complication, right? There's always opportunities to get more complicated.
Absolutely.
Yes. Any other comments or feedback on the work? Okay, let's talk then a little bit, Mary, about what your experience has been in terms of gaining exposure for the work, building a clientele, how you've gotten the exposure. What have been your avenues for getting your work in front of potential buyers and building collectorship?
Okay. I am going to say right off the bat, I am an introverted artist. And
I think that's redundant, isn't it? Isn't that a...
Yes. An oxymoron. That has always been where I've struggled through my, work life. I rely heavily on my local people. I've been in the same spot now for 20 years. I've been working in clay for 40. So I do have a loyal customer base. I do show. I show with my art group. I've had shows in the past. I do have work at art centers in the area. I do have a website. My student assistant and I are working on that. I have had them through the years. I've had Etsy store. I do, market on social media, but it's hard. I'm in a very remote area in Illinois. I am in the middle of nowhere on a little, 10-acre plot. And I guess, historically, I've just spent way more time at the wheel than I have marketing. I have been able to get rid of what I'm creating for the most part. But I do want to, ramp it up. So I would appreciate, any advice.
And so give us an idea, and it doesn't have to be exact, but just approximately, what would your monthly production look like? How many pieces might be coming out of your studio in a typical month?
Really depends on the month. This time of year, I'm filling orders. Gosh, it would be hard to estimate how many pieces. I would say a couple hundred probably.
Yeah, so you definitely have the ability to produce an inventory, and the nature of the work that you're producing lends itself to production and creating inventory. And it sounds like from what you're saying, you are able to sell the work and get it out there, but maybe you're not achieving the price points that you might hope to, or maybe not having the work sell at for lack of a better way to put it, in the venues that you might like to see it selling in. What other challenges do you feel that that you're facing with the marketing and sales of the work?
Well, definitely the price point issue. I have this philosophy that if people come out to the studio, I just want the work to be affordable. I've got, loyal customers, and I have always struggled with pricing. Where are we going?
We're just hopping ahead to our section to look specifically at pricing.
Yeah, $225, and they're selling at that, but I there's a lot more work in them than that.
Yes.
But in this area.
And so I am excited to have your work on here to be able to look at a different medium and think about it. But I was also very interested to talk to you because I think what you're describing reflects what many artists experience, especially artists who are living in areas that don't have established, developed art markets, maybe don't have a lot of galleries, maybe it's just a few community galleries. And so definitely this sense that, the prices that you're able to ask, the volume of sales that you're able to achieve can be driven by the circumstances of your location as much as anything else. And that can feel limiting, and you can almost start to feel trapped by the market, because as you say, well, I want to keep it affordable for my clientele, and that puts a ceiling on how much I can ask for, in terms of the value of pieces. Now, I do have to say that affordable is very much a relative term, right?
Yes.
It's funny because we'll have, in my gallery, I'll have people come in who maybe aren't as familiar with the art world and haven't spent a lot of time in it. Maybe they're bringing their kids along, and the comments we hear will be, "Oh my gosh, can you believe this is $1,500? I can't. That's incredible." Or, "Here's a painting for $4,000. Can you imagine someone paying $4,000 for a painting? It's ridiculous. You could buy a car for," those kind of comments.
Exactly.
And then we have people from New York come in, or, even locals in North Scottsdale, and we'll be visiting with them and talking about the artwork, and they'll drop a comment like, "Boy, I love the artwork that you're carrying, and I just can't believe how incredibly affordable it is," right? So it's very much a relative thing. What you're accustomed to is going to drive your reaction to the price points of any work that you see. And so, we've talked about it here before, but it bears repeating that in a lot of ways, when we're thinking about promoting and marketing and selling and pricing our artwork, the venues that we choose, not only the venues, but the markets that we choose to show our work in, the venues in those markets that we select, in a lot of ways, at the same time, we're choosing the values that we're able to set on those prices. And I think what you're describing, Mary, where you kind of feel like you've maybe reached a ceiling on what you can afford to charge for the work, or what people will be willing to pay for it, describes a little bit of the trap that we can get in if we limit ourselves too much to our local markets when we're in an area that doesn't have a developed market. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a rural area. I know plenty of artists who are in sometimes large metropolitan areas who have the exact same experience. They just don't feel that they're in an area that has a well-established art market that can bring in the galleries and the salesmanship and the expertise that it takes to attain those higher price points. And so then the question becomes, what do you do about it? I saw in a number of the comments, because you asked, in fact, let me go back to the question the way you asked it. In your form, you said, "Like some guidance on marketing, what would be a good area of the country for this type of work? I live in rural Illinois and have a hard time getting what I believe the work is worth." And so a lot of the responses that I got from various artists who saw your work on the website before the session today were, "Come to my area. There are great galleries in my area. Go to, well, in fact, let me not tell you what they said. Let me pull some of you in here and ask you, where do you think Mary ought to be showing and marketing her work? What would your advice to her be?" Throw a hand up and give me some suggestions of places she might think of going. Let me go to Susan first. And Susan, it should be asking to unmute right now. If you'll click on the microphone. There we go. Good morning.
Thinking of Chicago.
Oh, there you go. So same state.
Yes.
Chicago.
Uh-huh. I remember being there and thinking that had higher levels of things offered. Uh-huh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, it has been a while ago, but I don't think it's dropped down by this timing.
Yeah, okay, good. So, I mean, you might not have to go terribly far on. I'm getting a little feedback, so Susan, I'm going to mute you. But potentially there could be some markets within,
Sure.
not even an airplane distance, but driving distance that could be good markets for you. Where else would we suggest? Kate, let me go to you, and then I'm going to go to Sheila.
I would look at St. Louis, Kansas City, Minneapolis, broaden your area a little bit. I would also, I don't know if American Craft magazine is still alive or Ceramics Monthly, but you might find galleries in there
Okay, yeah.
that carry more craft work. And I don't care how far away they would be. I would check into those because they're going to specialize and they're going to have the bucks to advertise in those magazines. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion on a couple of different levels, and it opens a little bit of a can of worms for us that we haven't hit quite yet, and that is that when you're doing something that has the potential to be functional, all of a sudden we enter this question, right?
Yes.
Wait a minute, is what Mary is doing, is it art or is it craft? Is it form or is it function? Is it aesthetics? That can certainly present its own set of challenges. Have you run into that, Mary? Do you get a little bit of a sense of, well, where should I be showing my work? Should it be in fine art galleries or craft galleries?
Yes, and I've always had that struggle in my work because I do love the functional, and I'm always kind of, there's always a nod to the functional. And yeah, a lot of people, like even my local customers, they question me. They ask me, what would I do? How should I display this? Could it be functional? Could it be? And we usually have a discussion about that.
Yeah.
So it depends on a lot of variables there, what the use could be.
Yeah, and so then the question becomes, as you're starting to think about, well, I want to expand my reach and I'd like to be showing in some venues in more established markets. Well, do I look for quote unquote fine art galleries? Do I look for galleries that are more toward the craft side of things? And what I would say is, and this is an echo of many of things I've said many times before, but that is that as you're starting to think about outreach, I'm going to encourage you to go broad. And what I have found in my extensive travels, and of course, whenever I'm traveling, I'm visiting galleries, I'm spending time on gallery websites. I have seen that seemingly in my lifetime in the gallery business, that some of those walls that used to be kind of hard divisions between the quote unquote fine art and craft world, that some of those have started to come down, that you're seeing fine art galleries who've said, yes, we want to show oil paintings and bronze sculptures and traditional fine art, but we're getting a clientele who's coming in who might not only be interested in those things and who might be willing to look at something that is more functional, that isn't at the quite astronomical prices that we have to ask for some of these other art forms, and that they may be willing to mix in. And so you're seeing a lot of art galleries start to offer objects of art,
Right.
that are both form and function. And my gallery has begun doing that, and I see that more and more, a willingness and an openness. So I wouldn't necessarily, if I was starting to think, if I was Mary and I was starting to think about doing some more extensive outreach with my artwork, I wouldn't necessarily limit myself to just galleries that, list themselves as craft venues. That there would be wider opportunities. Now, I wouldn't rule those venues out either. I would want a list that just included a broad range of anyone who might have the slightest possibility of being interested in my work. Is this a gallery that's carrying work that would be harmonious with the aesthetics of my work? And they may not even be currently carrying anything that is ceramic or stoneware or that I might think of as being complementary to my work, but it may be that they're looking to expand a little bit. And so, once you've created a digital portfolio of your work and can start outreach to galleries and submit by email, there's just no reason not to get it out as widely and as broadly as you can and give a lot of different venues an opportunity to see that work. Now, what I would suggest is that as you're starting to think about that and reaching out into other markets, is that we should be creating a portfolio with price points that you aspire to achieve with your work. You do not want to go out into the broader marketplace with a portfolio with current prices listed.
Yeah.
You know, if our aim is to double the value of your work, or I think that pretty easily looking at your work, and let me, I could hop back over there, 225 and 150. It's not hard to imagine you could triple or quadruple those price points and in the right venues still be considered a great value, for the artistry that's going into creating this work. So I almost, there are two ways you could think of it. One is I have certain price points and that limits me to a certain subset of venues where I can show my work. Or you could think I want to show in these kinds of venues. I'm going to price my work appropriately to be in those kinds of venues and get out there and get some exposure and, go for it. And that will lead to another slight dilemma, which is at a certain point, as you start to get into venues at higher price points, now you have to start to step away from your current venues and your current audience or at least bring the price points in line, and you may lose some of your clientele. But the risk is that you can become trapped in a vicious cycle if you only ever base your prices on your current audience, and wait for them to come along and demand that you raise your prices, because that's just going to be a very long wait. And so I encourage us to be aspirational when it comes to pricing, to get our pricing where we would feel like now I've got some room to grow and make some real profit as I sell this work and compensate myself for the time and expertise that I've developed in creating this work. And then I'm going to go out and find venues that can justify those price points. There's a whole spiel, and I know it's easy to talk about and a little bit harder to do, but let me pull a few more of you in. Elizabeth, let me go to you, and then I'll go to Patricia.
Hi, I find your work very interesting and beautiful. My first thought was Asheville, North Carolina. It's kind of a mini mecca of fine art craft venues there. It's just been like that for a long time. They're starting to add more two-dimensional artists in, but they really do a beautiful job there. And so that also brings up, Jason, the other question of being able to package and ship and get everything there. And so your prices really do have to go up, because you've got to start including what that's going to cost you to get your beautiful pottery with functional art there.
Yes.
But Asheville's a great place for you.
I've been there. It was years ago. I used to live in Greensboro.
But, well,
it's been a long time. But yes, I hadn't thought about that. But I think that's a great possibility.
Yeah, and there are, I agree, Asheville and that kind of market. There are a lot of little resort destinations that, have gone a little bit different path. They're not a Vail or a Jackson Hole or an Aspen or that kind of market. They are looking for more of an artsy, cool little vibe, and a lot of little galleries and shops in those markets that would be very appropriate and can get those higher price points. I mean, you can think of some markets like that in Texas or Colorado, that aren't the core, like I say, not the Vail necessarily, but maybe the Steamboat Springs or some of these other markets that are just a little bit, they offer an alternative to the Uber collector base that you might find in those first markets.
Yes.
So, and Mary, let me ask you, have you done much shipping or had to deal much with logistics of getting the artwork around?
Not these larger pieces with the additions. I do ship my functional work quite often, but I haven't done, like the large piece with the big branch, and I haven't done that because it's intimidating to me,
It is, right? It's a little terrifying to think about the risks involved. And again, we're already talking about several different things that could potentially be kind of mental roadblocks to us getting the work out into the markets. Well, now I got to worry about higher price points. Now I got to worry about logistics. But I would just say that those are all problems that only really have to be solved once. Once you've figured out the right price point and you've sold one piece at that price point, that problem is solved. You now know that there's a market out there. Once you've gotten a large piece out to Oregon, and shipped it across the country and done it safely, again, that can be done. And so, it may take some digging and some time and getting some feedback from other artists who are doing shipping of similar work to yours. You may have to invest in a foam machine or something to be able to do it efficiently. But again, we just don't want those little logistical issues to be the dead ends that prevent us from achieving what we want to achieve and make us feel like we're stuck in our current situation. Sheila, let me go to you. Then I'm going to go to Patricia, and then we've already blown through our time. But Sheila, let me get your comment, and then I'll go to Patricia.
I was going to suggest not forgetting the Great Lakes, because a lot of wealthy folks go up there and charter boats to go out and get the big fish, and they may be dressed in plaid and waders and all kinds of things, but they've got some cash. And the other place is maybe down by Branson. A lot of families go there, and maybe they don't have a lot of discretionary cash, but there are a lot of folks who own homes around those lakes too.
Yeah.
And they're looking to decorate those. So you'd have the perfect combination of the rustic nature that would fit in beautifully with both of those places.
Very good suggestion. I would not
Yeah,
have thought of.
and I do think that you're doing work that we've used the word rustic a few times here, but it's interesting because I think it also has a contemporary appeal to it. And so I think you could hit a cross section of potential collectors that would allow you to reach into, yes, some of those kind of markets we've mentioned, where cabins are being built, but I wouldn't have any trouble seeing your work also showing in some more metropolitan, urban, contemporary markets. And so, I just wouldn't expect you to have a hard time coming up with a list of hundreds of potential galleries that could be interested in your work. And then it's just a matter of time of getting the portfolio out to them and sharing it, and waiting for the responses to come back and find a good fit. Patricia, let me go to you. You're going to get the last comment, and then asking to unmute now. Let's see if we've got you. There we go. Oh, yep.
Okay. I was going to suggest outdoor art fairs, because in our area, ceramics does very well. And all of the ceramics I have in my household, which I have a lot, are from art shows.
Okay.
It's an interesting suggestion. Have you done outdoor festivals, Mary?
I used to do them a lot when my kids were little. 20 years ago, I did the little circuit, and I just got so exhausted by carting everything around that I came back to the studio and said, everybody's got to come to me.
Yeah, it is definitely a lot of work, but it's a valid point that there are alternate venues as well if you want it to be more in control of kind of working directly with the clientele.
Yeah, complete with the vacation.
Select the right markets.
That's a good point. Complete with the vacation
to Disney and SeaWorld, and come to our area. There are a lot of outdoor art shows in the springtime here.
Okay.
Yeah, all great suggestions. And I think that the consensus that I think we can all arrive at here, Mary, is that the world is your potential oyster here, right? Like there are just a lot of different venues. You're doing high quality, unique work. You've already sold it, so you've already proven there's an aesthetic interest in that work. We would just need to prove that we could do it at a little bit higher price point. And I just wouldn't anticipate that being a challenge. Do some research, see, find some other artists who are doing work that is similar in material to yours, and see what their price points are. And I anticipate that you'll be able to easily find artists who are in the 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 times where you're currently pricing. And so again, we just want to choose markets that can sustain those prices. Mary, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work with us. What's the best way, if we want to kind of keep up with what you're producing and doing, what's the best way for us to follow you?
Well, I am Chicken Scratch Pottery on Facebook. That's probably where I do most of my social media work. Like I said, I have a student who's starting on TikTok and doing Insta, but
all of them, yeah.
You know, I'm an old lady, so when I post, I use Facebook. But I'm working on, you know, getting some other platforms.
Awesome. Well, we'll start with Facebook. But again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your work, and we'll look forward to seeing you push forward. And you know, as always, you know, if there are follow-up questions to this, I mentioned next week we're doing the Ask Me Anything session. If you think of something else, pop it into one of those sessions, and I'm always available. You all have my email address. It may take me a few days to get back to you, but if there are specifics about pricing or venues, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, next week, we're going to be an hour earlier for most of you. It'll be an Ask Me Anything session. We will look forward to seeing you then.